we can yeah, thank you. So we're kind of hung up on this. We've receded. The House Conference Committee has receded on our E, and now we are on the Senate's E, trying to understand the implications of leaving it in while retaining the House's original language, and what we would need to do with the Senate's E to conform it, basically to conform it to the House language. And so I asked Director Obrecht to come, and I think we had it kind of backwards. So Director Obrecht, could you kind of walk us through how we would conform Senate E to the House position?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think what you want to do, subsection B, is the section that says no public entity shall enforce any mandate or standard of the federal government, which requires an employer to require their employee to receive a COVID-19 vaccination. So I think what the purpose of the new subsection E, the Senate subsection E, is to say that a public entity can apply for a federal grant or reimbursement, which has as one of its qualifications that employees receive COVID-19 vaccines if the provisions of subsection B are not in force at that, or not enforceable at that time. So I think the way Senate E would read, if I understand everyone correctly, is nothing in this section shall prohibit a public entity from applying for a federal grant or federal reimbursement and verifying compliance with the federal COVID vaccine mandate. Strike until, insert while subsection B of this section, you strike becomes, and you say is not enforceable under subsection C or D of this section. And subsection C or D provide for when B is no longer enforceable after the federal mandates take legal effect. And if there's not a stay placed by a federal court during a lawsuit based on one of the federal mandates, challenging one of the federal mandates.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman.
Please, Senator Kinsey.
Before we broke, Representative Greer had suggested striking under subsection C or D of this section. You feel those should be retained?
Mr. Chairman, I really think that you can leave them or they can go. It's, yeah.
Is it clear without them?
Well,
Pardon?
Director Obrecht, please go ahead. What do you think?
I'd probably leave them in, but it's okay either way.
Senator
Well-
Kinsey?
Well, ultimately, this is going to come down to a hospital board trying to decide whether they can submit for Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. So whatever is going to be the clearest, simplest to understand is what we need to have, or we're going to close hospitals. So if we can lose subsection C or D and make it clear, let's do that. So they can apply for Medicare reimbursement while subsection B is not enforceable. In other words, we've got all this litigation going on, trying to wait to see it resolved.
Director Obrecht, does it still work without C and D?
Well, you bet it actually broadens it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just as a policy question, don't we want these entities to apply regardless of whether it's enforceable or not enforceable?
So Mr. Chairman, I'm tracking on the same line as Senator Ellis. So I think that's what we're trying to do here is we want to encourage them to keep going through, applying for the federal dollars, making sure that they're can do the compliance. So under that scenario, why don't we just put a period after vaccine mandate? Nothing in this section shall prohibit a public entity from applying for a federal grant or federal reimbursement and verifying compliance with federal COVID-19 vaccine mandates, period.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, let's look at that.
Senator Ellis, I'd like to hear Director Obrecht, just what's the implication of what he just suggested?
Well, I think it's the whole crux of what you're trying to do here is if the Center for Medicaid and Medicare says to receive reimbursement, you have to have all your employees vaccinated. That would, then essentially what you're saying under E is if you say that you can verify in compliance with that, then you negate B's effect on those entities that would apply for the grants or reimbursement.
Okay,
So if
let's just back the period up to take care of that issue.
To where?
So what we want to do, getting back in, to get to Director Obrecht's concerns there is we could back that period up to reimbursement and put a period. Nothing in this section shall prohibit the public entity from applying for a federal grant or federal reimbursement. Does that still have the same consequences? Now we've said that's not verifying compliance with the federal COVID-19 vaccine mandate.
Director Obrecht.
Well, Senator, I think you could have the potential to Senator Kinski's point, to leave some of the hospitals questioning exactly what they could verify compliance with at that point. I mean, could they impose a vaccine mandate? And I don't think they can if B's in effect. I think probably the right way to do it is if you don't want to include under subsection C or D, just put the period after enforceable, while subsection B of this section is not enforceable.
Representative Zwanitzer.
Thanks. And it's probably for Mr. Obrecht. Is applying the same as receiving? I just want to make sure we're not, missing something. Sure, they can apply, but I want to make sure that money is still flowing in without any complications. Nothing else in the federal rules are going to say your application now requires X, Y, and Z. I just want to, I think what we're really getting at is making sure that money, we don't shut down any hospitals. I just want to make sure apply is the correct word.
Director Obrecht.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's the right word here. I think to the extent to receive, we don't know what the federal rule will ultimately say.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski.
So a question, Mr. Obrecht. So let's look at the span of a year. Within that year, there's constant application for reimbursement. And then an application for a grant to build a new wing or something. And you have to submit the grant. They want you to register the compliance. If you get the grant, you got to register the compliance. Then there's the potential that all through that, maybe a stay is on, maybe a stay is off, maybe a stay is on, maybe a stay is off. Can they just keep doing business as usual with your sentence the way it is, ending after enforceable?
Director Obrecht.
First clarification, not my sentence for sure.
Yeah.
And no, I think you're right. I think that's an issue.
It is the issue.
That's really the issue with the whole, whether the laws are enforced pending stays of federal litigation.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Obrecht, that's what our Senate amendments were intended to prevent, the light switch effect. Did we achieve that with our language or not?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator-
Senator, you certainly achieved it with the language in the Senate.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm still of the disposition that what we want to do is allow these people to continue to apply and continue to seek reimbursement.
Correct.
Whether there's a stay in place or not. Now, we're not talking about the compliance issue here, whether they're compliant with the federal law or the state law. We want that flow of exchange going back and forth. Does that then, now, we're not saying that you have to, because we're not talking about at this point in time an employer mandate. We're just talking about applications and reimbursements. That's all we're talking about. We're not saying we have a whole section of law now that deals with what you can do and can't do as far as vaccine mandates. What I'm trying to figure out is there a way, or do we even need to call this out that you can continue to apply and you can continue to seek reimbursements? Whether the federal law is in effect or whether the state law is in effect. Because what I don't want to do is tie these up because there is a federal mandate or a state mandate. I want that free exchange of applications and funds flowing back and forth, regardless of where we're at within our parameters or their parameters. There's other things that will govern that they will have to look at. Is there a way to craft that where we can do that?
So.
Or do we obviate the very effective B, C, and D?
So Director Obrick, if we go to, Romanet 3 in the definitions and we look at what the House did, basically that is what the House did, is that except that public entity does not include an entity receiving federal funding that by complying with subsection B of this section would lose that federal funding, right?
Mr. Chairman, I think what you're up against here is CMS is likely to say to receive reimbursement for Medicare patients, you have to vaccinate all your employees. You've got a subsection B that says no public entity shall require that. So you've got the tension between the two. This was trying, my understanding is this subsection E was trying to give public hospitals an option to still apply for that while the state requirement was not in force or effect. And I think what Senator Kinski points out is an issue is that how would you know, either on the state side or the federal side, if we've got this provision that you can't impose a vaccine mandate if it's in legal force or effect, and when?
So, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
So let me go, I think it was Chairman Summers's question. If we dropped the Senate version of E and reverted to the House's language in Romanet 3, lines 3 through 6, is that cleaner and clearer?
Director Obrick.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator, and what you're stating is that on the top of page 7, lines 3 through 6,
Correct.
if you reinsert in the definition of public entity, except that public entity does not include an entity receiving federal funding that by complying with subsection B of this section would lose that federal funding. Yeah, that would be cleaner. But essentially what you would do, just so everyone's clear, is hospitals, public hospitals in the state would require vaccine mandates.
So, Mr. Chairman, so maybe we'll take another 15 minutes and the House will go back and discuss whether we want to, we'll discuss whether your language or our language is better. I think we need to have a conversation amongst ourselves.
And Mr.
And by that, I mean that whole section, B, C, and D,
Mr. Chairman.
please.
So just, I would just, for your consideration, before we break, page 7, line 4, we probably ought, if that's the language that comes back, should include an entity receiving or applying for federal funding. Just thought. And I think that's a midway position between whatever we did in E and our rewrite of C and D.
So the House we'll take a break and the House will go back and examine this whole series of sections and decide which position we want to take. And then see where you guys are at.
All right.